Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we're going to be talking further about a book that I reviewed on my other channel, Christian Answers. It is a book by James Garlow, pastor of Skyline Church in San Diego, California, and it's called Well Versed. And the section that I was reviewing on the other channel, which I will talk a little bit more today about on this channel, is his section on Social Security. And I'm not going to go over all of the different points that I talked about on those other programs. You can jump over there if you want and check out the Christian Answers channel and talk and find out more about my critique of his understanding of Social Security. He comes down on the side that he thinks Social Security is an entitlement program. And I refute that by saying, no, an entitlement program is not something you pay into every paycheck for 40 years before you can draw out. That's what Social Security is. You pay into it every week with your paycheck for 40, 50 years. And then when you get to retirement age, you can begin to draw out of that. That is a forced, disciplined savings account, you might say, pension account. So that is one aspect that I critiqued his view of Social Security. But I also mentioned that I agreed with a lot of what he said about Social Security as far as from a biblical perspective, it is the primary responsibility of family to take care of the elderly in the family, not the government. So it's nice to have a savings account that introduces discipline into the life of workers and people who receive paychecks so that by the end of their life, they have a savings account which they can then draw from that they have paid into over their lifetime, and that helps. But that does not take away from the fact that the Bible outlines family as the most basic responsibility for elderly people. And you have a situation sort of like the Waltons on television, if you're familiar with that TV show from the 70s, where you have Grandma and Grandpa Walton living there. You have Mr. and Mrs. Walton living there. And then you have the children living there. And even, I think, by the end of the series, there was even a baby that was born, so grandkids. So that you have like 3 or 4 generations of family living under the same roof. And, of course, the familiar closing of the program was Goodnight, John Boy, Goodnight, Mary Ellen, blah, blah, blah. So you have this whole multi-generational family situation there. That is God's plan for Social Security, if you want to call it that, or a safety net for the elderly. That is God's plan. Family is God's plan. So you incorporate the elderly in with the family. They live with you. They eat with you. They also contribute by doing whatever they can to help around the house, whether if it's Grandpa outside the house helping John Walton with the sawmill, making deliveries, running errands, or if it's Grandma helping Mrs. Walton in the kitchen and in the home, keeping up a home economics, homemaking. And you have the elderly contributing some, whatever they can, based on their energy level and their ability. And then you have the rest of the family absorbing the bulk of the support, and that's the way it should be. Today, we have a Social Security system that is set up for people who have paid in and their spouses. That family system can be circumvented or even eliminated if there's enough retirement account income for elderly people to live independently. But independent living is not the biblical model per se, strictly speaking. But again, I argued that there's nothing maybe wrong with having a forced savings account and forced pension by the government. James Garlow, pastor of Skyline Church in San Diego, in his book Well Versed, he actually argues that having a Social Security system violates the Bible's understanding of government. And I argue that it isn't a core value of government. It isn't there to punish the wicked and reward the good citizens. It's not there to keep law and order. These are core values of government as the Bible describes it, but it doesn't necessarily contradict the core values, and it's not forbidden by God in His Word to have a social security system. And it should be properly run and administered so that when people who have invested for 40, 50 years get to retirement, they will have something that they can draw from. And that's totally compatible with a family structured living arrangement, because then the family who the elderly live with then can benefit from having the extra pension amount that will help with food and extra costs and all kinds of things. So that could be totally compatible. But what has happened is that we have this Social Security system, and people have interpreted that, even Christians have interpreted that to mean that elderly people should be totally independent. They should totally live apart from their children, and that their retirement and pension accounts will provide for them up until the point of death, and no family is needed to intervene and to live with and help support them, and so on and so forth. But that is a distortion of Social Security system. Social Security system could be totally compatible with a more biblical family-oriented retirement. And then there's the whole, I agree with James Garlow in his book on Social Security, the section there, that he talks about the whole idea of people hitting a certain age, like 65, it used to be, now 67, and then boom, stopping all work, stopping all productivity, stopping all accountability, and just living a life of leisurely, sometimes luxury if they have a big enough account, but most of the time, most people don't have a luxurious retirement account. They have a retirement account, but they treat it as if it's an endless vacation. So they are saying, I don't want to work another hour in my whole life. I don't want to have to be any place at a certain time. I don't want to have any responsibilities. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I want to just kick back and enjoy time for me, because I've actually heard people say that I've been giving out and working hard for other people and children, and now it's my time. No, that is not biblical. And I totally agree with James Garlow in his chapter on Social Security that that is not God's vision for older age people, and that the Walton family model that we saw in the 70s situation, it was a show where grandma and grandpa worked alongside the others in the family for the good of the family, to help support the family, and they were contributors to the family. They were productive to some extent. They obviously not as productive as the middle-aged John Walton, and also the younger Waltons, especially like John Boy, and those were the more productive members of the family. But the elderly grandpa and grandma did contribute to the family. They felt needed. They were needed. They kept active. They weren't just sitting around watching TV. They didn't have TV, I don't think, at that time. They had a radio that they would sit around the radio in the evening and watch some of the, or not watch, listen to some of the older radio programs. I think radio was being phased in at that point. So this was before the time of Social Security, actually, before the time in 1935 where it started. And so the Waltons were gathered around the radio as a family, and it wasn't, the older people weren't shoved off into the nursing homes, and they weren't isolated in their own homes. And the families were together. And that is a more biblical, godly model, Christian model, if you will, for elderly existence than we have today. And part of the contribution that contributed to the reason we have this false view of retirement is Social Security, because what had happened is when it was implemented in 1935 by Franklin D. Roosevelt, he envisioned this as a program for elderly to prevent them destitution and poverty. And at the time, 65 was their full retirement age, and people didn't live much longer than 65 usually. So at 65, you could begin to draw on Social Security, but you only had a couple years of life after that. So it wasn't this decades-long retirement that we have now. But that's what happened as more and more people begin to live longer. Longevity began to spread from 65 all the way then to 75, then to 85. People now are living routinely into their late 80s and early 90s. And that means 20, 25 years of actual retirement. And so people began to think, well, hey, this is a time for me to goof off, and I'll get a RV and we'll just travel the nation and travel to different states, and we'll go to Florida for the winter and avoid the harsh weather and hang out down there during the winter, and then we'll migrate up north for the summer and goof off here and visit grandkids here and just have a good time as if we're on perpetual vacation. That is not the biblical model, and that's not God's will, but that was enabled because of the longevity that came in through modern medicine. And people, instead of just living to 65, they started living to 85. So that enabled that mentality and enabled people to think, hey, I should plan on quitting work. And now you can do that early at 62. And now you have like maybe 30 years of no responsibilities, no work, and so on and so forth. So that's how that mentality of this myth of just kicking back and doing whatever you want to do in a sort of a selfish way and not thinking in terms of being productive or serving the kingdom of God. It's just a very, very self-centered, egotistical, I'm going to get all I can get and spend it all before I die mentality. That is not right, but people are entitled to the savings that they put into. And if you go back to the Social Security website, as I have, and sign up for a Social Security online account, you can actually check how much money that you've paid in over the years, and you will be amazed at all of the thousands and tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars that you have paid in to your Social Security account, you and your employer. So it's usually, if you work for a company, they split it. So the employer actually is paying half of your Social Security bill, and you pay the other half. I think 6.5% right now. Now, if you're an independent worker and you have your own business, or if you're a minister, you're a pastor like myself, I've had to mostly pay the full amount. So instead of having some employer pay half of it, like a regular company does, usually in church ministry, the pastor has to take out the whole amount for himself, which is okay. I'm not complaining. But if you look at it, you will find that you have contributed a lot of money. So it would be totally, totally unfair, outrageous, if the U.S. government were to allow the Social Security Trust Fund to go broke and then tell the people that have paid in their whole life, hey, guess what? We don't have any money for you. You're going to have to figure out something else. That would be totally outrageously unjust. So we can't have it go broke. But what can we do? So I want to spend a few minutes talking about what we could do as far as thinking about the Social Security Administration and the future of it. While I agree with James Garlow that the family is the first and primary Social Security for elderly people, the reality is we do have a system in place right now that can assist the elderly, whether they're independent or living with family, in growing old and affording the cost of things. And prices are going up. There's no question about it. COVID-19, just a few years ago, the government went on a spending spree, and everyone was getting some kind of a paycheck for this, personal paycheck protection plan for corporations. They were getting free money. People were out of work and they were getting free money, stimulus checks, extended unemployment checks, this, that, and the other. There was money flying all over the place. Well, we're having to pay the price for that now with higher prices, inflation. So when you inject trillions of dollars into the economy, that's going to raise prices. And it is. And so the system of Social Security is there to help older people afford their later ages and their later years. And so I am not in favor of dismantling Social Security. I think it needs to be reformed, but none of the cuts should ever occur to people who have paid into it under the old system. So if we're going to tinker with it, we have to make sure that cutting the benefits of those that have paid decades and decades off their paycheck into it is not affected. That is totally outrageously unjust if we say, okay, you're going to have to, even what the social administration is trying to throw around today is like, well, if things go the same in the year 2032 now, the trust fund will not be able to sufficiently cover payments. And so it will have to be cut by 23% to payments. That is totally unfair. My generation, for example, had the Social Security age raised from 65 for full retirement to 67. So we already had an adjustment that was made. And it was an adjustment that cost us. Okay, so it was 65. Now they said, oh, it's 67. I don't want to hear the government saying to my generation, okay, now we're going to cut your benefits by 23% because the trust fund. No, that you're tinkering with people. You promised, we paid in, we did what we're supposed to do, and we need to figure this out. And cutting benefits on those who have paid in for 40, 50 years is not an option in my eyes. I don't see how that could be a fair option. But what we need to do is, one, we need to get the best and brightest minds working on this now, because 2032 is only, 6 years away at the time of this recording. So we need the best and brightest thinkers tackling this problem and trying to figure out, okay, how do we administer this program? Very popular program. I mean, people depend on this. If this thing were to go away tomorrow, people would be on the streets. Elderly people wouldn't have resources. It's different than it was back in the days before Social Security, where the Waltons on Walton Mountain, Grandma and Grandpa Walton, they didn't have Social Security. But they didn't count on Social Security. They hadn't paid into Social Security. And if you look at the amount that's paid into Social Security, if you go to the administration site and you sign up for an online account, you look at your money, you're going to go, wow, look at all that money. I could have bought a second home. I could have bought a cabin in the woods. I could have done this and I could have done that with all that money, right? You could have, but you saved it away like the government told you, compelled you, ordered you to do. They took it, and it should be there for you because it's your money. It's not anybody else's money because you paid into it. It's right out of your paycheck. You earned it, so you deserve it. And so we need to get the best and brightest minds working on this problem, whether that means assembling a blue ribbon panel, as they call it, of experts, the smartest people in our country, professors, if it could be, academics, business people, mathematicians, just Einstein-level intelligence working on this problem. How do we implement this system? How do we reform it? How do we improve it? How do we fortify it, make sure it's strong, healthy? What do we have to do? And then come up with solutions and implement those solutions so we don't lose this program that everybody's paid into. The next thing, we need to rule out right off the bat cutting benefits. You have to take that off the table. That is not a solution. You don't need a panel of experts. You don't need the best and brightest to come up with a solution. We have to cut benefits. That's going to happen if nothing's done. So if there's nothing to gain by assembling a panel of experts to tackle the problem, then it's a waste of time assembling a panel of experts. But no, there is something to gain. We can come up with solutions, and we don't have to cut benefits, because we should never, ever have as an option cutting benefits. Again, that is not fair to the people who have paid into it their whole life. There are options that don't involve cutting benefits, and one of them is like what happened to me in the 80s. Before the 80s, I was paying into the system, and the full retirement age was 65. Then they said, no, that's too early because people are living longer and longer lives. That makes sense. People are living longer and longer lives. That contributed to the whole problem of distorted retirement as just a fun vacation for 20 years. So they said, we're going to raise the retirement age from 65 to 67. So 2 more years. It is an option. It's on the table that they raise the retirement age again, 67 to 69 or 67 to 70 or something like that. I don't know what it would be. But that is an option. And people say, well, that's not fair. I know. I had it raised in my lifetime, my retirement age from 65 to 67. So it's not fair. Okay, it's not fair, but I had to go through it. So why don't younger generations have to go through that? And it's the same reason. I had to have mine raised from 65 to 67, and they did it because people are living longer. I'm living longer than the average person, say, 50 years ago, or 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And the people who are coming up and they're younger than I am are living longer than I will live. So, and there's better health care, and there's better medicine, treatments. So it is an option to raise the full retirement age, but don't raise it on people that have already had it raised. So there needs to be some equitable treatment in that. There also could be fudging with the cost of a living adjustments. If you are aware, Social Security recipients get a cost of living adjustment, COLA, every year. Now, sometimes it's 1% based on inflation, or sometimes it's 2% or 3% or whatever. But that could be adjusted based on the formula you use. And to tell you the truth, if they have to cut something, I would say have them cut the cost of living adjustment rather than cut the actual payments. So instead of talking about we're going to cut, 23% off the payments to everyone who received it at some point in the future, instead of doing that, I would say, hey, it'd be better to cut the cost of living adjustment or cut the amount of the cost of living adjustment. I'd rather have the payment coming in than to have the increase every year with the cut, if you know what I'm saying. So maybe that could be worked on. And then also another suggestion would be to stop expanding the roles of disability and all the kinds of situations where people can draw from Social Security that didn't pay in. There are all kinds. It's been expanded over the years. They keep expanding it more and more and more and more and more and more benefits here, more benefits there to these people. No, don't keep expanding it when you can't even afford, and you're talking about cutting it to the main recipients. No, you can't do that. You have to honor and respect the people that have paid in 40, 50 years and not give it to people who haven't paid into it at all. And especially, we need to make sure that illegal aliens are not receiving Social Security, and even people who come into our country later in life, and be strict about it. I mean, if you're an elderly person from Nicaragua and you come into the United States through legal immigration, you should still be required to have to pay into it the 40 quarters. And if you don't pay into it 40 quarters, which is the current amount, then you don't get it. You shouldn't be allowed to come into our country, whether illegal immigrant or legal immigrant, and begin drawing from Social Security and benefiting from Social Security. I mean, there needs to be a tightening of the standards, a sharpening, so that we make sure that the people who are paying in, week in, week out, are not cheated at the end and we can't afford some government officials say, well, sorry, but we're going to have to cut your benefits by 23% or 50%. No, that is totally unacceptable. And I think that would probably spark a second revolution, second civil war. I don't know. But there needs to be the best and brightest. The government needs to give this priority attention, needs to come up with a fair and equitable system that actually respects the people who have already paid into this savings account with their blood, sweat, and tears of their work every day in and day out for years and decades, 50 years sometimes or more. And they need to not have to worry about having their savings account stolen from them. And we need to tighten up the requirements and make sure people who shouldn't be getting it aren't getting it. If we do that, I think we can save it. We'll talk to you next week on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.